Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be exploring this whole idea of living in God's love through faithful obedience. And we're actually taking a look at this article from the Positive Affirmations website, and it's got some really cool visuals. They kind of illustrate this concept of finding, joy and peace through obedience.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the things that's so fascinating about how the article frames obedience is that it's not like this set of rules. It's like, it's a way to connect more deeply with God's love.
Yeah, and that's really what caught my eye too, because it kind of makes you rethink how we view obedience.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into the practical application of it all, let's start with the core concept. What does it even mean to as the article puts it, remain in God's love?
Well, so the article it pulls from this passage in the Bible, John 15:10, it's where Jesus uses this analogy of a vine and branches.
I love that analogy.
Yeah. And he describes himself as the vine, like the source of spiritual nourishment.
Right.
And we are the branches. And just like a branch needs to stay connected to the vine.
To survive.
To thrive. We need to stay connected to Jesus.
Right.
Through obedience to really experience his love and flourish in our lives.
That's powerful. It really is. It makes me think about what happens to a branch when it's cut off, right?
Yeah.
And it just withers and dies. What are some of those signs that we might be kind of withering in some areas of our lives because we've become disconnected from that source?
That's such a good question to reflect on. I think, the article visually shows this. It contrasts a flourishing branch with a withered one.
Okay.
It's almost like this stark reminder, hey, you have a choice.
Right.
And you're the consequences of those choices.
Yeah.
But it also gives you this hopeful image.
Right.
Okay, what would it look like for me to be that thriving branch?
So how does this whole obedience thing translate into something we can actually apply in our daily lives, Let's start with our personal relationships. What are some examples of how following God's commands can actually lead to more joy and peace in those relationships?
Well, the article brings up forgiveness,
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a hard one. And it says it can be one of the toughest commands to follow, but it's so essential for our inner peace and our healing.
Yeah.
And when we forgive, we let go of the bitterness and the resentment that can just poison our hearts.
It really can.
And it creates space for restoration, both within ourselves and our relationships.
I really connected with the story of Emily and Sarah, these two friends.
Yeah.
Whose relationship fell apart because of betrayal, right? Emily's, just her struggle to forgive Sarah, and then the ultimate transformation that came when she chose to follow God's command to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful example of that healing and joy that forgiveness can bring.
It is. And I think it speaks to the struggles a lot of us face when it comes to forgiveness.
For sure.
Makes you kind of think, have you ever been in a situation where forgiveness felt impossible?
Right.
And what is it costing you to hold on to that resentment?
That's a good question. The article also kind of emphasizes this idea of compassion and service, as ways to really live out our faith, not, out of a sense of duty, but a reflection of God's love in how we interact with others. What are some practical ways we can do that?
Well, it could be as simple as, volunteering at a food bank or helping a neighbor in need, or even just truly listening to somebody who's going through a hard time.
Right.
And I love how the article shows this. It's got this picture. It's this watercolor image of a person offering bread to someone in need. And there's this warm light radiating from that interaction.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel overwhelming.
Right. Exactly.
It's attainable. But what about in our professional lives? How does this concept of, faithful obedience kind of work in the workplace?
That's where integrity comes in, I think.
Yeah.
The article says that obeying God in the workplace looks like being honest, being kind, striving for excellence in everything we do.
Okay.
These values, they not only honor God, but they contribute to a more fulfilling and meaningful career.
So it's not about compartmentalizing. It's about bringing those values into every
I think so.
aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
What stood out to you about how they applied these principles, in a professional setting?
The case study of Michael, the small business owner,
who
chose honesty even when it meant losing money, financially.
Wow.
His decision to be honest in all his dealings, it led to more trust from his clients.
Of course.
And his business actually did better than he expected.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is.
It's a great example of how doing the right thing, even when it's hard, can actually, lead to success. But the article doesn't just focus on those big dramatic decisions, right?
Yeah.
It's also about those everyday acts of kindness. What are some ways we can be more kind in our workplaces?
Well, the article gives some practical steps, like, helping colleagues that are struggling, speaking with grace, even in difficult conversations.
Oh, that's hard.
It is hard, yeah.
Huh?
And celebrating the successes of others. It's about creating this positive and supportive environment.
Yeah.
They even have this watercolor picture, it's a workplace scene, and you got one employee helping another, and the whole room is filled with this vibrant energy. It's just a little act of kindness can change the whole atmosphere.
All this talk about forgiveness and compassion, honesty, kindness, it can feel a little overwhelming. Do we have to be perfect in all these areas all the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that leads us perfectly into the next section of the article. It's all about the transformative power of small choices.
Oh, here's where it gets good. Tell me more.
The article kind of shifts focus from those big gestures to the idea that it's those small choices we make every day that really make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, that feels much more manageable, right?
Right, yeah.
Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you make a small donation to a family that's struggling to make ends meet.
Okay.
That little act of generosity, it might inspire them to help someone else.
Oh, wow.
When they're able to.
Okay, yeah.
That one act of kindness, it can create this ripple effect.
Wow.
That just goes on and on.
It's the butterfly effect of goodness.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
So it's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about making those small, conscious choices.
Exactly.
That reflect, God's love in our lives.
The article mentions things like telling the truth, honoring our commitments, treating people fairly. It's these little things, when you do them consistently,
right,
they can have such a big impact on our lives and the lives of those around us. They draw us closer to God and let His love, shine through.
It really is amazing how powerful those little seemingly insignificant actions can be.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on, though, I'd love to get your take on this concluding image from the article, the one with the person standing under the glowing vine, bearing the fruits of, love, joy, and peace.
Yes.
What do you think the significance is there? What's the article trying to tell us?
I think it's a beautiful visual of what the article is all about, which is that a life lived in obedience to God is a life that flourishes.
Mm-hmm.
It's about staying close to God, like that person under the vine,
right,
and letting His love nourish us and transform us.
It's that vine's providing everything that person needs to strive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a short break.
Okay.
To explore this idea even further. Welcome back to our deep dive into living in God's love through faithful obedience. We've been unpacking this whole idea of how connection with God can lead to, a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, and we were just talking about that really striking image from the article, that one with the person standing under the glowing vine, bearing the fruits of love, joy, and peace. You were saying it represents a life that's nourished by that connection.
Right, the vine is giving that person all the sustenance they need to thrive.
Right.
And those fruits, they're not something you have to struggle for. It's just the natural outcome.
Right, it just flows.
Of that connection.
Right.
Yeah. But the article also emphasizes that, this faithful obedience thing, it's not about being perfect.
That's an important point. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's we're human. We're going to mess up.
Right.
We're not going to be perfectly obedient all the time, but that doesn't mean, God's love is gone.
So it's not about being flawless. It's about the direction you're facing. Exactly. Yeah.
The intention behind your actions.
Yeah. It's if you're learning to walk, you're going to stumble, you're going to fall.
Right.
But, as long as you keep getting back up and moving towards your goal, you're making progress.
You're getting there.
I think that's really reassuring because sometimes people, they hear the word obedience and they think it's all these restrictions and no joy.
Right, a bunch of don'ts.
Yeah, exactly.
But this article's painting is a very different picture.
Right.
It's full of love and joy and peace and abundance.
It's not about restricting ourselves. It's about aligning ourselves with the source of all goodness.
Yeah.
And letting that goodness flow into our lives.
The article ends with this thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
And it says, what small choice can you make today to stay near to God's heart? what do you think the significance is there? What's the article getting at?
It's like, okay, let's take all this, these great ideas.
And actually do something with them.
Right.
Even small choices can make a huge impact on our relationship with God.
Right.
It's not about like waiting for this big moment to prove our faith.
Right. It's those little...
It's in the everyday thing.
Exactly. Where we can choose love or kindness or honesty or integrity.
What I appreciate about this article is that it doesn't shy away from like talking about God and faith, but it also like presents these concepts in a way that's like approachable.
Yeah.
Applicable to our lives.
I totally agree. It's this nice balance between spiritual and practical.
Right.
It encourages us to think about our relationship with God.
Right.
But it also gives us, concrete steps we can take.
So we've gone through, the key themes and we've unpacked, all the symbolism of that concluding image.
Mm-hmm.
We've thought about that, challenging question about like what those small choices are that we can make to stay near to God.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to highlight?
Yeah.
I think the article just does such a great job of showing how powerful it is to live in God's love through, being obedient. It's challenging, but it's also really hopeful.
Yes.
It shows us that, it's not about earning God's love or following all these rules perfectly. It's about having a real relationship with Him, a deep connection that brings us joy and peace and purpose.
That's beautifully said. And I hope our listeners are feeling, really inspired to take action, even in those small ways, to make those choices that bring them closer to God.
Yeah.
And let His love, work through them.
Absolutely. It's about like taking all this and actually living it out.
Yeah.
Those moments where we choose kindness instead of getting impatient, or, we're honest when it would be easier to not be.
Right.
Or we forgive when we'd rather hold a grudge.
Yeah.
Those are the things that shape us.
Right.
And they have a ripple effect.
I think that's a perfect place to kind of pause our conversation for now. But we will be back in just a moment.
All right.
For the final part.
That's good.
Of our deep dive into living in God's love through faithful obedience. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into living in God's love through faithful obedience. It's been a really great conversation.
It has.
Exploring these ideas of connection and growth.
Yeah, the article does such a good job of taking these kind of like abstract ideas and making them real, with the examples and those pictures.
Those visuals were so powerful, weren't they?
They were.
I keep thinking about that one with the ripples in the water,
Yes.
Like how our smallest actions can have this much bigger impact than we realize.
It's a good reminder that we're all connected and that our choices can make a positive difference, way beyond just ourselves.
And of course, we have to mention that final image, right? The one with the person standing under the glowing vine, bearing all those fruits of love and joy and peace.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful picture of what that flourishing life can look like when we're connected to God.
Yeah, it really gets to the heart of what we've been talking about, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Obedience isn't about being held back. It's about, like, tapping into this source of life.
Right, abundance.
Abundance, yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I hope they walk away feeling hopeful and empowered.
Okay.
Like, I want them to see that living in God's love isn't about trying to be perfect or following a bunch of rules. It's about having this relationship with Him that brings joy and peace and purpose into their lives.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I hope they feel inspired too, to actually take action, even in small ways, to make those choices that draw them closer to God and let His love work through them.
Absolutely. It's like, okay, we've talked about it. Now what are we going to do about it?
Right, exactly.
It's those everyday moments, like choosing to be kind when we're feeling impatient, or we're being honest when it would be so much easier to just, not.
Right.
Or forgiving someone when we just want to hold on to that anger.
Those are the things that really shape us.
Yeah, they do.
And they have that ripple effect,
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
If you're listening and this has resonated with you, I encourage you to go check out the full article. It's on the Positive Affirmations website.
Yeah, go see those visuals we were talking about.
Right, they're amazing.
And there's even more in there to, think about and reflect on.
It's a great reminder that, inspiration can come from anywhere.
Yeah, it really can.
And that faith is a journey, There's always more to discover.
Always learning, always growing.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, may you find joy and peace and a deep sense of connection on your own faith journey. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the things that matter most.